Lady Lindy, Mealy, and Millie are some of the names you may have heard her called. Her name is Amelia Earhart. You may think that her triumph was being an influential women pilot and her tragedy was her disappearance, but that is not true. Amelia Earhart changed the way people thought about women pilots by overcoming tragedies and achieving triumphs in not only her aviation career, but throughout her entire life. Amelia Mary Earhart was born on July 24th, 1897. Amelia was born in Atchison, Kansas, where her grandparents lived. Her parents were Edwin and Amy Otis Earhart. Amelia had a hard childhood because her parents moved around a lot. They moved around a lot because her mother had a hard time without Amelia's father because he moved for his job. Once they had Amelia, they traveled together, leaving Amelia with her grandparents. Alfred and Amelia Otis, her grandparents, gave her parents a nice, stable place for their family, but they wanted to stifle Amelia and her sister Muriel's creativity and to teach them how to be young ladies. That didn't stop their parents from interfering and parenting their own children. They encouraged their children to be creative and test the limits. Amelia and Muriel loved to play around. They climbed ropes and made their own stilts. Amelia once made a roller coaster on top of their house. Even though the first time she fell and crashed to the ground, she said it was like flying and improved it. Amelia's adventurous spirit triumphed over her stifling grandparents. After living with her grandparents, Amelia's father got a new job on the railroad. He drank with his colleagues and became an alcoholic. The family started moving around a lot because Amelia's dad was fired from his job. They finally settled for a longer time than other times in Chicago, Illinois. There, Amelia's parents separated. Their mother stayed with her daughters, and their father went to Kansas City, where a sister lived. In Chicago, Amelia became very engaged in her studies at school, especially chemistry. School might have helped her cope with whatever sadness she might have felt at her parents' separation. Although she loved to study, she didn't enjoy the awards and didn't want to be rewarded. She didn't receive her high school diploma until 17 years later. Her commitment to her studies, like chemistry, helped her cope with whatever happened in her personal life. She used education to triumph over family tragedy. Amelia's mother decided to send both of her daughters to college of their own choice. While Muriel decided to go to St. Margaret's in Toronto, Canada, Amelia went to Algonquin School. Algonquin School was a 2-year college for young ladies that was close to Philadelphia. There, they learned proper etiquette and behavior with other things. In college, she kept a scrapbook of newspaper clips of influential women that inspired her. She, too, wanted to make a difference. In 1917, Amelia went to spend Christmas in Toronto, Canada, with her sister Muriel. When she was at Algonquin School, she had not realized the reality of World War I, even though the U.S. had entered the war. Amelia, in a letter, wrote that she wanted to stay in Canada and help with the hospitals. She said that she couldn't bear the thought of going back to school and being so useless. After Christmas, she returned back to Philadelphia to finish her senior term, but she no longer was as engaged in her studies. Finally, in February, she dropped out of college to help the soldiers. She took a short course on first aid before being assigned to Toronto's Spadina Military Hospital as a nurse's aide. She was at work 10 hours a day, and she did anything she could to help out. She quickly became a favorite among the sick and injured patients, soon getting the name Sister Amelia. She continued her work even after the war during the influenza epidemic. During the epidemic, Amelia caught sinusitis. Even though she got over it, it affected her throughout her life and career. It made flying in an open cockpit difficult. Amelia wanted to be like the ladies in her scrapbook, and one day she would become one. She understood at a young age that through tragedies you had to make the best of it. During her nursing career, a pilot tried to scare her while she was with a friend. The pilot tipped the nose down and flew down with all the plane's might. Amelia's friend ran, but Amelia stayed her ground. After that, she said, I determined then that I would one day ride one of those devil machines. By this time, Amelia was on the West Coast, and there were several airfields she could visit there. Her family rarely saw her because she was working all the time and tried to spend every spare moment at the airfield. For her uniform, she got her hair cut short, wore baggy pants, leather boots, a leather jacket, and goggles to fit in with the other pilots. Through her hard work, it was overlooked that she was a woman and was called a natural. Amelia wasn't intimidated by being one of the few women flyers. She triumphed over stereotypes. She knew flying was what she was meant to do. She once said, "It is so breathtakingly beautiful up there. I want to fly whenever I can." As she grew more and more famous, more opportunities began popping up. A goodwill flight across the Atlantic between Britain and the U.S. was planned by Amy Guest. Miss Guest bought the plane Friendship for the flight. Pilots Wilmer Stoltz and Louis Slim Gordon were going to fly the plane, but Amy wanted an American girl of the right image. Amelia was that girl. Amelia and the pilots went to Canada because that was where they were going to take off. During the flight, Amelia had to lie on the ground and be the logger of the journal while the men flew. Even though being included on the flight was a triumph for women, she still was not allowed to fly during the actual trip. While up in the air, she also took pictures of the clouds and the views below. When they got towards land, it was not their intended target. They finally saw land in fishing boats. They'd reached Bury Port Wales. "Congratulations," said Hilton Riley. "How does it feel to be the first woman to have flown the Atlantic?" "Like a sack of potatoes," she replied. "Bill did all the flying. I was just baggage." She did not feel that she had the right to be honored for being the first woman across the Atlantic. In her old hometown of Atchison, from the Atchison Daily Globe, the headline was, "Atchison Girl First to Fly Atlantic." Through being the first woman to fly across the Atlantic, she created a triumph. But believing that she didn't do anything really, and as a woman she could do much more, she felt like a failure. After competing in the Women's Derby, she became the very first president of the Flying Women 99s. The 99s encouraged Amelia to be the first woman on a solo flight across the Atlantic. Amelia met that challenge. That became her greatest and most famous triumph.
I flew for a couple of hours while sunset lasted, and then 2 more hours as the moon came up over a bank of clouds. I had fair weather for 4 hours. Then I ran into a storm, which was one of the most severe I have ever been in. I milled around in the storm here for probably an hour, and with difficulty kept my course. I had been troubled with my exhaust manifold burning through all night. A weld broke shortly after I left Harbor Grace, and I could see the damage increasing as the night wore on. I found specific thunderstorms probably 300 or 400 miles off the coast of Ireland. I believe I saw land.
After she conquered the Atlantic, she looked for an unknown flight. There was one from Hawaii to the U.S. After successfully flying that distance, she put her eyes on a brand new goal. That was huge, flying around the world. On her way, she successfully traveled from North and South America, across the Atlantic and Africa, and finally across Asia. She was flying to fuel on Howland Island before finishing out her circumnavigation of the globe. It was then tragedy struck. She and her navigator, Fred Noonan, disappeared. It is one of the biggest unsolved tragic mysteries of history. Amelia Earhart lived a life of triumph through her adventurous spirit, nursing career, champion female flight, and tragedy, a rough childhood, discrimination, and ultimate disappearance. These triumphs and tragedies make her one of America's most loved figures.